right, welcome back everyone to this episode of Faith Infused Leadership. I'm your co-host Meredith Banka, here with your host Debbie Heiser, and today we're talking about a subject that is not necessarily an easy one because there has been so much going on in our community and our world right now, and people are expressing opinion all over the place about several different issues that we're facing as a culture and as a community worldwide. And so today we wanted to talk about, when does your opinion really matter as a leader? When should you share it? And when do you maybe need to just keep it to yourself? So I know you've got a lot of thoughts on this, Debbie.
I do. And I have to tell you, Meredith, to kind of start this off, I want to give a little caveat on the fact that I have started numerous social media posts about this. And don't get me wrong, because when I talk through this, I'm going to try to remain kind of calm and more as a leader. But a lot of the things that are happening right now in the world fire me up a little. And I was lucky enough to be a part of a conversation yesterday. A colleague of mine, Misty Springer, and I run a women's group called Uplift Her, and we had a mastermind call, and we were talking about this a little bit. And it just really got me to thinking even further about what we're going through in the world. And when you talk about leadership and opinions, there are so many different ways that we could take that, whether it be an opinion about a company-wide change or a policy. And my own opinion on that and what I've experienced in my leadership is that as a leader, when there is change going on in the organization, I have to take myself through the change process pretty darn quickly, because I have a choice to make. And if that change is in alignment with my integrity and alignment with who I am, then I need to go forward and help lead people through that. But in order to do that, I have to be one step or two steps ahead of kind of where they're at. Not always, but for the most part. And then there's the other piece of it where it happens in a worldview type of situation. And this hits COVID, but I really want to focus a little bit on the social justice things that are going on right now. And there's so many, whether it be some of the laws passed just yesterday about the LGBT community, whether it be Black Lives Matter, whether it be a feeling of Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter, like there's just so many things out there right now. And part of what I want to go into with this, Meredith, is that as a leader, we have the capability to influence people, and we are human. So no matter how much we try not to have some kind of judgment, there always seems to be some kind of judgment. And that feeds into then what our opinions are. I hope that through these podcasts, people have understood that I stand for love. So for me, differences, when I say they don't matter, they matter because I want to learn about differences. I want to see other perspectives. That makes me a better leader. But when it comes to working with someone or looking at someone, I just see a human being. I don't see those differences. Now, let me back up. I may see them and I may ask questions about them because I haven't experienced that. But what I really want to dig into in this episode, and then I'll be quiet and let you ask some questions too, but is really right now, particularly, there are time and places for leaders to put opinions out there. It's not appropriate, in my opinion, to lie. So if I'm in an organization and something comes down from the top and I don't necessarily agree 100% with it, I may say, you know what? There are certain times that we do things that we don't always love to do. But as a supporter of this organization, I support this, and let's move forward and figure out how we're going to move forward with this. If I'm in a situation today with some really heated opinions, so I even struggled, do I want to talk about this on a podcast?
Right.
I really feel like right now, part of the problem is there are 4 levels to listening, and we are in this, I'm gross overgeneralizing here, but it seems like we're in this mode of it's my side or your side. Versus let's create some generative dialogue to understand, but also I can't really feel like I have an opinion. I have an opinion about people are people, but I don't know what it's like to be Black. I don't know what it's like to be in the LGBTQ community. I haven't experienced that. What I have experienced and what I feel like we need to do is turn the lens onto ourselves and really do some self digging to say, are there things that I'm doing subconsciously? Are there things that I don't even realize I'm doing to potentially create an atmosphere that people feel less than or feel differently about? And really, when I look at it, it's how can I then, as a leader, create this love and safety so that people feel comfortable enough processing through it without feeling like I'm going to jump in and try to create their opinion to mine.
Yeah, and I so identify with what you're saying. And, a couple of things come to mind for me. One of them is really about the four agreements and,
Yeah.
having integrity with your word. And I so love what you're saying about leaders, regardless if it's in relationship to your opinion or not, but we do have the power to influence others. And we largely do that with our word. So I think to have that check before you post, I love that you haven't posted about this yet because you just weren't quite sure how to show up in that and have it interpreted the right way, right? And so I think we as leaders need to continually be asking ourselves, if I share my opinion, if I form an opinion and then share it, is that going to have the opportunity to positively influence people in their experience? Right. And, I personally recall a time where I was asked to form an opinion around something in a corporate setting. And I simply responded with, there would be no advantage to me to form an opinion around that. So I simply don't have one. I'm choosing not to form an opinion because it's not going to be helpful if I do.
Yeah.
So, how do leaders allow themselves the space and the time, given the pace at what we're moving at right now with all of this? I mean, things are happening so fast. What are your suggestions for a leader to allow themselves the space for that personal internal conversation?
Yeah, Meredith, that's a really good question. In the realm that I would say it depends on, if you own your own business, that's a little different. If you work for someone else and you have a manager or a leader or a colleague that you feel like you can process through some of this with, a trusted confidant. And I've talked before about having a board of directors, and this is where that board of directors comes in handy. So not just one mentor, but numerous mentors that have different thought processes and can stimulate some intellectually, socially heartfelt conversation. I've been following Chris Angel, who I know you know as well. And I love some of his posts because he's kind of like, I don't really know what to do with this, but here's how I'm feeling about it. And, as a leader, it's important to be able to talk through some of that in order to kind of form which way you're going to go. And it doesn't mean that you don't share your opinion. I shared my opinion that I think people are people regardless. But I also want to step back and realize and put the caveat out there that I don't know how some other people are feeling. And so I think it's important to kind of just take a pause before we all have gut reactions to things. I think it's important to take a pause. Now, I will tell you, personally, I have been struggling because I see things posted on social media, and I know there's a trust level right now too of what is being shared honestly and what's not. But listening to, and watching documentaries that are out there, there's a lot of reading right now, particularly about Black Lives Matter, speaking with friends that I have. And, then I see posts too that say, if you're being quiet about this, that's a message too. And I do think sometimes no action is a message. And so that's where I've struggled, and I've almost put out, I don't even know what to say about this, other than to say I'm just really disturbed. And so I think we just have to be honest, but we have to step back, find some safe people to talk through it with, journal if you don't have time to talk to somebody else about it, because we all have these gut reactions about it. But I will tell you too, Meredith, there's a part of me, so I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here, because there's a part of me too that struggles and said, we won't see any change in this world unless we do become a little bit vocal about things, right? So, but I think too, it's about being wise enough to know who should be carrying the flag. Years ago, I had a mentor, a business mentor, say to me, you don't always have to be the first one, because I was the training executive. And they said, you don't always have to be the one that jumps in to like defend training or to try to influence why training's so great or whatever the topic is about training. There's a lot of us out here that have your back and support what you're doing. Let us carry the flag for you. Kind of like in The Patriot, it's an old movie, or in war, you know, people would carry the flag over the hill. Let somebody else carry that flag and it will be much more effective. So it's like, as a leader, sometimes too, it's important to understand your role. You know, is it my role to carry the flag? Because I do think there are times when I think about massive change that has happened in our nation, from even the birth of our nation. It took people that were willing to die for what they believed in, right? To make things change. And so you have to understand and realize, when is it my turn to carry the flag? And when is it my turn to support the person that's carrying the flag? And in some ways, I don't know about you, but in some ways that's where I've been struggling. Like, who's carrying the flag? And, you know, like, how do I support this? You know, that all lives matter.
And I think especially right now, because neither one of us happen to be members of either, you know,
Right.
either of the groups that are really carrying the flag, if you will, right now. You know, one of the thoughts that I have had is that it's almost the same flag. It's the flag of equality, and that's been carried by every different, you know, gender, every different sexual orientation, every different religion, every different race, every different everything at one point in time. Yet we still haven't gotten it right, you know. And so I think that's a wise question to ask ourselves. If this isn't our flag to carry, how do we support those who are carrying it to the best of our ability? And how do we do that in a way that the end goal is change? Because I think, you know, nearly everyone would agree that the way that things are going cannot continue, even though they may not have the answer to what it should become. We know that something must change. And perhaps that's the message that is there for us to carry if we're not directly impacted, is that, you know, we need change for a lot of different reasons. And I think it's also, you know, you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, and you were sharing that we seem to be so polarized anymore around any issue, right? You're either in camp A or camp B. You know, you're either in one end zone or the other end zone. That we're not allowing room to listen and to have exploration and potentially then expansion of thought, right? And instead we're just like, you know, my way or the highway. And that's creating more of this divide rather than the community that in the end I think we're all seeking. And you know, I don't know what your thoughts are around that, but I think it's in particularly interesting with COVID and how much time we've all spent in smaller groups, how much we're searching for and seeking community, yet at the same time not seeking knowledge and understanding. That's what I'm baffled by.
Yeah, and I have to say, Meredith, that's the thing that really breaks my heart more than anything, is this whole we have to have sides on any issue. I mean, this goes back years and years and years, but I even think about in South Dakota with the indigenous tribes and the oils and, you know, like all of these things, it's always a one side or the other, or even the takeover of an organization, two merging companies, right?
Yeah.
And then it automatically creates defensiveness versus, hey, let's look at this and how do we make this better? And yes, in this case, when I talk about Black Lives Matter, the systems of our first responders and specifically police have not always been set up the best way. So we have to step back and look at the system. And I struggle even when I hear people saying, let's be the bridge between the two, because then that to me says they both need to come middle way. And this is an opinion that I'm about to share, but like, I'm not so certain that it's an equal meet in the middle, and I think that's where sometimes too, there's this push and pull. But instead of saying, let's come together and figure out what's a solution to this, how do we make this better? But the problem is that the same people that created the problem, what is it, Einstein, I think, has this thing that says you can't have the same people that created the problem create the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I see right now, and in my experience, I'm seeing some awesome leadership rise up, to say, how do we change this? What do we do to make this better? And I don't know, it saddens me that we as humans continue, if you go back in world history, like from Cain and Abel,
right,
there, like there has been strife and people pointing to differences, people fighting each other. And that I sometimes just don't even know what to say about it. I'm not saying that it's not justified. But I do have to say, as a business owner and as a leader, my 17-year-old niece is heavily involved in an organization that started up in, I don't know where it started up actually, but it's across the United States, might even be worldwide. And they started a youth segment of it that focuses on social justice issues, not just the Black Lives Matters. And she started in this organization prior to all of this happening. And having some conversations with her recently, and she's actually doing some work for me this summer, and we were talking about posting and what some of my opinions were about certain things and how did I want her to approach it. And just her questions as a 17-year-old were just really insightful and really made me stop and think about, like, what systems do I have set up that would embrace inclusion, would embrace people that are different than me, to want to engage. And it just was really insightful. And it wasn't coming from a place of it needs to be this way or that way, but just really insightful questions that I may have her on the show sometime and kind of talk about that. I don't know, but and to me, that's what we have to look at. And I don't think there's a black and white, well, that's not a very good example. There's not a like clear cut, it's just a really complex situation. And I think for me, Meredith, where I get really uncomfortable is with extremism, because I do feel like, and this is an opinion, so I say opinion and experience, but in my experience, when we try to be too extreme on one way or the other, it never works. Like, even if you look in history, it ends up in war, right? And so, or revolution, or so I do feel like, and I've talked about theory U before, that when something is dying, going down that U and coming back up, something else is emerging. And I do feel like we're on this precipice of, to me, now the work needs to be done. Like, how do we change these systems? How do we create a better place?
I agree. And I think it has, impacts in our personal life and in the workplace. And I think having conversations like this today and being open to, I think typically on this podcast, we come out and share your knowledge and your experience, and you offer very specific guidance for people in relationship to leadership. And I love that today you're coming out and having an open conversation and sharing your thoughts and feelings around this without necessarily having the answer, because this is deep and long rooted, heavy stuff. And we aren't going to solve it and come out of, theory U right on this other side and improved, with love in our hearts and excitement to move forward in our lives without doing the work. And this is what doing the work looks like. And so I really feel like you're not only setting an example for that in this instance, but also for leaders to really consider where they may want and need to do that in the relationship to their work, which might be on this topic or another one. So, for this episode of Faith Infused Leadership, if someone wanted to learn a little bit more about what you do and the projects that you have going on, where would be a good place for them to go and find that information?
Yeah, Meredith, I'm going to touch on that. I do want to have just one more thought before we close out on this podcast. And that is, to me, the best thing that those of us that have fair skin, that are white, that we could do is to really take a look at what is white privilege and where have I been privileged. You and I were talking before this started. I've never had to have a conversation with my son, who is an adult male now, about what to do if he's pulled over by a policeman. Some of the conversations that some of my Black brothers and sisters or LGBTQ community have had to have with their children, I haven't had to experience that, and that breaks my heart to think about that. You've seen movies and that type of thing. But for me as a leader, what I want to try to influence is that we all take that lens of observation and turn it back on ourselves and really look at what is white privilege. That is what I can connect to and try to change. So I would say that. And then if you want the opportunity to continue this conversation or to work with me around leadership or with your own business, and some efficiencies, and even talk about what are ways that I could be more inclusive, please feel free to go out to my website at www.3, that's spelled out, THREE, V as in Victor, consulting.com, and set up a half an hour discovery session with me, because I'd love to continue this conversation and help other businesses really look at and say, what can I systematically do to create more inclusion for everyone?
Awesome. Well, thanks, Debbie. And for this episode of Faith Infused Leadership, I'm your co-host, Meredith Banka, here with Debbie Heiser, and we will see you all the next time.
Thanks, everybody.